Hello, Vermonters. I hope to talk with you about policy issues related to carbon taxes. And we see the phrase no carbon tax, and a lot of people think that's just about whether or not you support the planet or whether or not you believe that renewable energy resources will help long-term the environment, which they won't if you studied it at all, because they exclude all of the poisons that are created in manufacturing those products. But what I'm focusing on here in a series of 3 articles, 2 of which are on True North reports, one's about to be published, and one is on today's American Thinker, the 25th of August, is about how regressive, meaning unfair and on the backs of the poor, the renewable policies in Vermont have been. I am a former tax attorney. I've studied tax policy for almost 40 years now. So here's what we need to understand. A regressive tax is like a flat tax is disproportionately burdensome to people of low income. So if you took 2 people and one earned $100,000 a year and another earned $20,000 a year, and you had both of them using the same amount of gasoline, then the impact of that tax on gas, or a sales tax on products, is going to be much higher as a percentage of income on the person with the lower income. As a percentage of the tax, it might be 6% on each. But on the percentage of overall income, the person with the lower income and often the lower assets is bearing a much higher percentage of the burden. That's regressivity or regressive taxation. In the case of carbon taxes, this is compounded in many ways. First of all, one of the problems is right away, when you have a gasoline tax or a heating oil tax or an income tax used to divert funds then to people who can afford things like solar panels or electric cars or heat pumps, then you're taking it from everyone and giving it to one group only. So you're not just taxing everybody equally for something like roads, which everyone uses equally, you're actually taxing it from the poor people to give to people who cannot afford. And I say poor people, I mean regular people, but we have a lot of Vermonters that are elderly and on fixed income. So let's say low income Vermonters. And then you're giving it to people, many of whom are just moving here, or look, I'm building a $1 million house and I'm going to put in heat pumps, and you're subsidizing it. But now the people that can afford the EV cars and the solar panels and the heat pumps get another benefit. Not only have they taken the money, so not just a flat tax for something universally beneficial, but it's gone to these people. Not only have they taken that asset improvement, that capital improvement into their asset or balance sheet, but now, because of that asset, they're not going to pay as much of the tax. If they're driving an EV car, they're not going to pay the road taxes. That's why Vermont is studying how to make up for lost revenues for people that drive EV cars. Because if you're not buying the gas, that's where the road tax is. As regressive as it was, this is even more regressive. Now, the person who has the heat pump or the solar panels, in the case of solar panels with net metering, is actually selling electricity back to the grid. Now, they don't necessarily get to cash it all in, but they can keep it in sort of an account. So now they're not paying any taxes anymore. They're not paying the higher electric rates that the poor old widow on fixed income is paying, sometimes to heat her trailer, while somebody else goes, oh, look at me, I saved the planet, I have a $30,000 solar array. Whether or not you support the solar arrays, whether or not you could afford it, when you know that you're having it paid for by elderly people or people with a lot of kids, that's not fair. And it's more than just regressive or flat taxation. And now we can add another layer. Because then those same people often that have a lot of wealth, they may have income that's not subject to regular income taxes the way the rest of us pay, particularly a self-employment tax and or the federal income tax requirements for Social Security tax and FICA and these that are on wage earners. But if you're a passive or portfolio income recipient, someone like Dave Zuckerman, for instance, who apparently makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in interest and dividends, he doesn't pay as much on his income to begin with because that income is given preferential treatment. For the person who's a wage earner working at Walmart for very little money, who may have an old clunker, gets it thrown off the road because it has a little rust hole or some other, maybe the engine light's on. He can't afford a new car, let alone a $40,000 car. Can't even afford a used car. But let's look at something else. When we talk about how we tax income differently because of its different natures, wages or earned income, portfolio income. I discussed this in the article today. We have different ways that we tax and characterize things like a capital gain that's long-term versus short-term. And we tax them at different rates for different reasons that are supposed to be equitable or fair, or to encourage certain forms of investment. And we don't do that with carbon, do we? So what we do is we tax a person who has to have gas or heating oil or electricity for basic necessities like food and shelter and to drive to work. And we tax them at the same rate as someone who might have 4 cars or a muscle car or go skiing or go, because the people who can afford the luxury of vacations or other things, which is fine, are those two uses of carbon the same? Because carbon dioxide that's used, if this is our villain, or pollution that's generated for people to survive and eat, whether it's in the Amazon rainforest or in Vermont, is a priority in usage of fuel. Farmers who use fuel to grow food should not be taxed at a different rate from consumers who drive to Aruba or fly to Aruba in an airplane or a jet that has no pollution control devices on it. Or how about Al Gore, who maybe has $1 million mansion and his electric bill is, $2,000 a month, but he can afford it. That's an abuse of the energy. That's a complete waste, but is he being held responsible for that? No, he can just pay it. It's like an indulgence tax. We already distinguish in Vermont. Anybody heard of red diesel or off-road diesel? We exempt it from the diesel tax because we don't want to burden farmers and others who produce food. And less do we make those distinctions for farmers. But in the regressive CO2 taxes already implemented in Vermont, we're not making that distinction at all. So poor people, low-income people, simply trying to eat, and now their health insurance premiums are going up, simply trying to heat their homes, are paying much, much higher percentage of their income on their use of carbon dioxide when they don't have the luxury to go on a yacht or go spend money in some other carbon burning way. So you've got rich people who are elite going, oh, look, I can just burn all I want because I feel better now because I'm paying my tax. You're not paying your tax, you're polluting. And whether you're paying for it or not, you're still polluting the planet, but you think you're saving the planet? All of this is worse than doing nothing. Personal responsibility is how we reduce pollution. It's how we also improve local agriculture and farming and take accountability for what we eat. Any of these problems need to be resolved at the local level, not the big level. And what Vermont has done is proven with its progressive onslaught against low-income Vermonters just how horrible this is. This is why Vermonters are suffering. Also, our education tax system, which is based on property taxes instead of income taxes, that's horribly regressive. And that's why many Vermonters are moving to other states where they can have a $200,000 house with only a $400 or $500 a year tax bill. And why many of those states actually exempt people over a certain age from having to pay any higher than a certain amount of real estate taxes. Vermont, in the name of saving the poor from climate change, is actually destroying the poor so that our wealthiest people and new arrivals can have the luxury of the delusion, the privilege, if you will, of thinking that they're doing something when they're actually doing the opposite to the environment and they're not helping the poor at all. And it's time for Vermonters to wake up to this. And I'm really excited as I go out and visit you and meet so many people, how many regular Vermonters understand what we're talking about here. They're not dumb. Do they know that they're paying $35 million a year every year in extra electric rates solely to fund EV cars and solar panels? That's according to our own state agencies. And yet the Department of Public Utilities continues to keep those rates high. It's time that we eliminated the regressivity of these taxes. Whether you want to build the renewables or not is another matter. If you want to improve your schools, which desperately need it, at the second most expensive school system in the country as a function of income, fifth, I think, in real terms, almost $20,000 a student with very low performance rates and proficiency in math and reading, the more you have government getting involved, it seems, in this state, the more it's hurting us. And we'll be talking more about this on the campaign trail, because these are truths that Democrats and Republicans are going to have to share. The truth is that this has been horribly regressive, and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars have already been withdrawn from the bank accounts and savings of our most vulnerable, low-income Vermonters How will that be restored? Is that equity? But I hear more about, we'll tax the rich some more. You're not taxing the rich. You're taxing the poor to give money to the rich while you pretend to be saving the planet and helping the poor. I think it's time that more Vermonters looked at what's going on. That's why I write my articles for both True North Reports and American Thinker. I have the links, I have the facts, I have the education and the training. And once you look at it, you can see these truths for what they are. And then you can tell your neighbors and tell others, because we're tired of this and we're not going to stand for it anymore. And inflation is showing all of these vulnerabilities. And the vulnerabilities are in our legislature and our bureaucracy, where they have done these things with no accountability, no critical thinking, and no common sense. So as always, I thank you very much for listening, and I ask you to share this video with other people, to ask progressives to tell me why I'm wrong, because they can't, because these are facts. And why don't you get a CLAR bumper sticker or a CLAR yard sign? Because that's how you show commitment to these ideas, to educating people, because they want to gaslight and suppress me and don't tell the truth. What kind of people would do that once they know that they are taking money from the poor, the low income, the retirees who are going to have to sell their homes this winter because they can't afford to heat them anymore? Thanks again very much for listening.